It is not always easy for the rational mind to fully grasp quite how pig-ignorant and willfully uninformed fans of Jesus can be. This week I was reminded of how important particular dates are by a make-believer who offered me that most pathetic proof of Jesus, the calendar itself, and the designations AD and BC. We date the years from the birth of Jesus, therefore he must have existed. Get out of that one, you pathetic critic of the one true religion. OK, we could forgive a child of 4 who managed to formulate a proof of Jesus from the conventional dating system, but for anyone else who has stopped peeing their pants, there is no excuse. And to save them the trouble of reading a book or consulting Google, let me quickly add, nobody did date anything from the birth of Jesus for over 500 years, until a monk working for the Pope came up with the idea of a Christian calendar. So you could say 500 years of history prove Jesus did not exist. Now, dates are important. Some are seared into our memory, 1914 and 1945, for example. But I want to talk about one particular year that Christians ought to reflect on, a year that tells us a lot about their Jesus, and that year is the year 36. Let me sketch in the background. In Rome, it wasn't the year 36 at all, but the year 789 from the founding of the city. Tiberius was in his 22nd year as emperor. In the tiny enclave of Galilee, a son of Herod the Great, Antipas, ruled as a client king on behalf of Rome. A couple of years earlier, Antipas had been summoned to Rome, and while there he took a fancy to his brother's wife, Herodias. He encouraged her to divorce her husband in order to marry himself. Not surprisingly, the existing wife of Antipas, an Arab princess, didn't warm to the idea of her husband's remarriage and fled back to her father, Aretas, king of the Nabateans. The flouting of the Jewish laws on marriage scandalised the Jews and caused a popular preacher and baptizer called John to criticise the king. Antipas, it seems, feared a popular uprising and had John first imprisoned and then executed. Another consequence was that the Arab king was so enraged by his erstwhile son-in-law, he invaded the territory of Herod Antipas and routed the Jewish army. Now this caused alarm in Rome, because Aretas threatened to redraw the borders between these small kingdoms. At this point, Antipas successfully pleaded for support from the senile Tiberius, and the emperor directed his newly appointed legate in Syria, Vitellius, to make war on the Nabateans and send him the head of the Arab king. Now that war never actually occurred, because while the legions were still on the march, Tiberius died and Vitellius halted, waiting for fresh orders. But in the meantime, Vitellius entered Jerusalem and removed both the prefect Pontius Pilate and the high priest Caiaphas. Now that was in the year 36. So here we have an interesting chronology between the hanky-panky of a Jewish king in 34, an executed holy man around the year 35, and a military defeat of a Jewish army in 36. Now all this provides us with a riddle, because we read in that Book of Wonders, the New Testament, that the ministry of Jesus occurred not before but after the ministry, imprisonment and beheading of John the Baptist. Now, can we squeeze the supposed ministry and passion of Jesus into the available time frame? Well, of course, Christians themselves have no clear idea of when their hero was performing his magic, many guessing the year 30 or 33, but others arguing for anything from 26 through to 36. Part of their confusion is that the Gospel of John says Jesus was working his wonders for 3 years, but the Gospels of Matthew, Mark and Luke say 1 year. But if the Baptist was imprisoned in 35, Jesus can't be placed earlier. And yet Jesus has to be off the scene by Passover of 36. Passover is a spring festival falling in March or April. So Gospel John is in serious trouble. But can we even fit in the stories from Matthew, Mark and Luke? We have to fit in sundry miracles and healings, perambulations around Galilee, traipsing the coasts of Syria, various lake crossings, transfiguring on a mountain top, and not forgetting those 40 days spent in the wilderness. It might just be possible to fit it all in between spring of 35 and spring of 36, but for one particular source that makes that impossible: the book of Acts. For one thing, Paul's conversions has to be later than normally ascribed, as also his persecution of the church that supposedly preceded his conversion. Also later will be the martyrdom of Stephen, Philip's evangelizing in Samaria, the trials of the apostles, and Peter's first miracles, all of which adds up to making the year 36 quite a year to remember. But then again, it isn't history, it isn't true, it's just more astounding rubbish from the New Testament.